Well, you wouldn't know it with the cold weather in Canberra tonight, but the summer months, they're creeping up. And no matter how many facts we can throw at the state Labor government in Victoria, it seems that we are talking about seeing rolling blackouts and job losses right across the state. With a target of net zero emissions by 2050 and talks of an interim target likely to be a reduction of around 45% by 2030, the energy market operator and many in the sector are calling for Daniel Andrews to explain exactly how he expects the grid to keep up with demand. These targets could see the Yallourn power station closed well before its 2031 end-of-life date. Not forgetting, of course, this plant supplies Victoria's 22% electricity. Tonight I'm joined by our resident energy guru and federal member for Hughes, Craig Kelly, to go through exactly how Daniel Andrews' energy plan will affect households in the great state, or the once great state, I have to say, of Victoria. Craig, thanks for your time tonight.
Good to be with you, Peter.
I want to start... Thank you, mate. I want to start with wholesale electricity prices. We've got a good graph I want to put up just to start the conversation going so people can follow it easily enough at home. You'll see there's been a huge spike in the price of wholesale electricity in Victoria from 2015 to 2018. It's extraordinary. Tell us what's the real driver.
Well, it's quite amazing, Peter. If you look at when the Labor Party, the state Labor government first came to office there, the wholesale electricity price was around about $30 a megawatt hour. Since then, the policies they've introduced, we've seen the price not double, but actually triple. To think that you could actually triple wholesale electricity prices in a few short years is what Victoria have managed to have done is just absolutely amazing. But why they've done this, Peter, they've simply been forcing more and more of these so-called cheap renewables into the grid that just causes chaos. That's why we saw them chase the Hazelwood power station out of town. They tripled the royalties down there and prices have gone through the roof, and they've continued to go through the roof. Believe it or not, Victoria this year has actually taken over South Australia as having the highest wholesale prices in the nation. And we saw the report today. Things are only getting worse. While we're getting some relief in the other states, Victoria is now the only state of Australia where electricity prices in Victoria are continuing to head north.
We know that there was brownouts last summer. We also know, and widespread blackouts for consumers as well. We also know there's scheduled outages on its way for industry. Now, how on earth does someone running a business in Victoria cope with intermittent power supply, cope with getting a letter from their provider or indeed a phone call saying, as of next week, we've got to shut you down between these hours? How do you run a business?
Well, Peter, you simply look at how you can move out of the state. And this is tragically what we are seeing happening. But it's also what we are not seeing or is not visible, that's investments that would have otherwise been made. People otherwise coming to invest and set up businesses in Victoria that need energy are simply not doing so because the price of electricity is just so high, and yet they look down the track, the policies that the Labor government want to bring in are not going to fix the problem. But with their this mad ideological drive that they have, will actually make the problem continue to get worse and worse and worse.
We don't often see energy CEOs enter the fray in terms of speaking up. We know they drink the Kool-Aid on renewables. We saw that with AGL before Andy Vesey left the country, but rarely do we see them speak some truth on these issues. We saw, however, Catherine Tanner of Energy Australia really bell the cat on this issue with the retirement of the Yallourn power station. Now, we know it's 22% of Victoria's grid. Not so long ago, they lost Hazelwood, 25% of Victoria's grid. As she's concerned, her company is concerned that, A, there's not much of a plan B, but all of the uncertainty and the push on renewables could see them close this plant, or could see this plant close earlier than its scheduled end date of 2031. What's the answer?
Well, Peter, the answer is they have to stop with their crazy 50% renewable energy target in Victoria. Remember, this was the same target that the Labor Party took to the federal Labor Party took to the last election, which they were widely defeated on. That was one of the reasons why Bill Shorten was defeated at the election campaign. Australians knew that it drives prices up. And the real concern in Victoria, they are currently running very close to the line on the amount of dispatchable power they have. So when there's days when there's little wind, and at times in Victoria, we've seen over the last couple of months, there can be times for hours on end where there can be the wind turbines in Victoria can actually be generating zero electricity. From all the wind turbines across Victoria...
Let's just stop there. Let's just stop there because I want to highlight that point you're making with some graphs. Take down the graph, please, producers, that you've got on the screen there. Put up the one that gives us wind energy and solar energy. And the example date is the 27th of July this year. Now, that was wind production. So you could see in the very early hours of that Saturday morning, we had basically no wind power in the state of Victoria, 27th of July this year. Also, obviously, 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, we didn't have much solar either. There's the solar graph. You can see there's basically no solar activity until about 9 a.m. Now, if you had the Daniel Andrews plan in action then, you got no power for most of the early night hours on the Saturday night going into Sunday morning. You've got virtually no solar power, virtually no wind power. You'd have virtually no power under Andrews' plan. What happens to your traffic lights? What happens to your hospitals? What happens to your households? What happens here, Craig?
Well, Peter, it's surprising. Actually, in Victoria, on that date, for example, that you gave, between midnight and 6 a.m. in the morning, they still needed between 4,000 and 5,000 megawatts of electricity. Now, that was basically being all driven from the coal-fired power plants. Now, the question is, if those coal-fired power plants aren't there, where is the electricity going to come from? You can build as many wind turbines as you like across Victoria, but if the wind is not blowing, you get no electricity. And we saw on that date, not enough from the wind turbines and the solar panels to boil a cup of tea. Now, more wind turbines...
Yeah, and we'll just put that graph up. I just want to put the coal graph up so people can see that you are absolutely telling your truth. These are all freely available statistics, and you can see when we had no wind and no solar in Victoria, dear old coal, the much maligned coal, had to step in and basically, you know, keep the lights on.
So the concern is, if they close down their other coal-fired power stations in Victoria, which is highly likely they'll have an early close down, because when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, these coal-fired power stations have to turn off. So it increases their maintenance costs. They can't sell their electricity to the grid. They get to a stage where they will close down. And then you've got the nightmare situation when the wind's not blowing, there's simply not enough power. Now, you might hear some people in Victoria, oh, we can solve this problem with big batteries. Now, I've done just a rough calculation. That 6-hour period from midnight to 6 a.m, if you tried to cover that with large batteries, what they have in South Australia was the largest battery in the world. You would need 225 of the largest battery in the world that they had in South Australia to run Victoria's electricity grid for 6 hours in the middle of the night. 225 of the world's largest battery for 6 hours in the middle of the night. And then what happens after that? You still need the electricity after that. So the idea that you can somehow cover this gap with large batteries is just absolutely foolhardy, and it's putting the whole security and the economic base of the state of Victoria in jeopardy, plus the knock-on effects that it will have into New South Wales and to Queensland.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's not good news going into the weekend, but we've got to keep talking about this so that Victorians wake up and see the sort of travesty that's headed their way by a government who didn't really campaign on any of these issues, but are springing it on them on the other side of an election. Craig Kelly, as always, thanks for the common sense and thanks for being here on a Friday night.
Thanks, Peter.